So punks, Linehammer, coined by yours truly, and already at the cutting edge of Warhammer the Old World controversy. If you don't know what Linehammer is, go watch my other video. But the core essential is that Games Workshop have performed the equivalent of splitting the Warhammer atom, and now any punk can swing, whether he's in base-to-base contact or not. This cataclysmic folly has detonated a chain reaction of total nonsense.
Well, man, this line is better than anything Khorne ever did for me. Blood for the Blood God. Ha!
Since my exposé, numerous critics have been lining up in an orgy of Linehammer denialism. Not just Goonhammer and friends, but men at the very top. Oh, they say, your Linehammer doesn't work. I'll flank you. I'll pile in 4 times as many units as you. Your line can't deal with terrain. Well, lordlings, good luck with that. If you're so sure, come down here and fight. One at a time or all at once, I don't care. Right, in this rebuttal to my critics, I'm going to show you why beating Linehammer ain't so easy as dealing with me provocatively shoving a plank of wood in your face. It's the stuff of nightmares precisely because you won't see it till it's too late. It's everywhere and it attacks at all angles. It's under your bed, it's with your wife, and it's coming to a gaming table near you. For those who want the nuanced, nice man talk and a cup of tea, stay till the end after the provocation. But for the rest, let me be clear. I oppose Linehammer and think we need an exorcism right now. But until the priests are sent in, me and Satan are taking you on a one-way trip to linear hell.
Welcome back to the universe of linear warfare. So we see here 2 identical Chaos Warrior units ranked up like gentlemen for friendly family sporting fun this Sunday afternoon. Nothing you wouldn't want your wife seeing here if she peeked round the garage door. No lines to be seen. Planks of wood firmly held in reserve for you to build that shed with next summer. Well, that's what you think, punk. So, we've got these old fogies here in green, who'd been rocking this same 5x4 ranked up formation since they were pushed out of a blister in 1988. But in the red corner, we've got the postmodern Linehammer men of tomorrow, whose vicious deconstruction of hegemonic Warhammer discourses will shortly be wrecking the world of armchair generals the length and breadth of the land. However, it certainly seems like they're playing fair, at least today, and are all ranked up like gentlemen. I wonder why. So, let's do a simulated combat between these 2 blocks. The fogies get the charge and crash into the guys in red. We witness another classic swords and sorcery rank and flank combat just like back in the day. And the fogies win and cause the guys in red to fall back in good order. So, all beautiful you might think. Warhammer's back. Linehammer? Just a bad dream. Sorry, punks, there's a but. A big but. You do realise that when you fall back in good order, that enables those who have done that to reform at the end of their flee. And what looks like this may very soon turn into this. Fancy it now, punks? Fancy your 5 attacks to this 20? Thought not. Yes, punks. That was a perfectly legal combat reform from these guys in red. None of them moved more than double their movement rate. Go play around in Universal Battle or Tabletop Simulator if you don't believe me. You can legally reform a 5x4 brick into a 20x1 line. And note that these punks who wanted to pursue here don't get that option to reform as those who did that fall back in good order. They have to maintain their lousy old ranked up formation. So they've got 2 options. Either they pursue into the line of doom and get their asses whooped, or they just stay where they are or try and shimmy backwards or do something else. Because then in the next turn, the line of doom is going to charge them and the outcome's going to be exactly the same. Bye-bye, old fogies. Get back to the past. See this here? This is the dustbin of history. And you know who's in it? These old fogies in their 5x4 ranked up infantry formation. Do you like it down there, punks? Want to get out? Well, if you do, there's one thing you could do. One way that you could reform yourselves in such a way as to have a chance against those postmodern Linehammer men of tomorrow. Prepared to do it to get out? All right, come with me. Ta-da! Those old fogies have proved that old dogs can learn new tricks and have reformed themselves into the only rational formation that could possibly counter Linehammer after that Faustian pact from the dustbin of history. Yes, they'd rather have 20 attacks coming back rather than 5, and only one formation allows them to do that. Guess what, punks, that it is? It's more Linehammer! Well, Dr. Blaxill, you might say, I've got no intention of basing my strategy around losing combat so I can fall back in good order. Well, punk, maybe, but you should also bear in mind that Linehammer can help you when you're on the front foot, too. So allow me to demonstrate. The fogies in green get their charge and unexpectedly lose combat marginally and are made to give ground by the guys in red. Now, during this crucial period, the guys in red get to decide what they're going to do with their restrain and reform test before they move in the next turn. I wonder what the possibilities might be. Et voila! So, you probably thought I was going to spawn into a line and hit those fogies in green in the face. And while that would have been good, it's not as good as this. The discerning Linehammer expert realizes the possibilities of spinning his line round. And in this case, these guys in red are about to hit those two stupid, unsuspecting chariots in the flank and wreck them. Note that I'm not remotely bothered if those guys in green charge me in the back. 'Cause you know what, punks? Linehammer's great from the front, but it's still the dog's bollocks if you charge me in the rear, 'cause it's going to fight with all those attacks and those fogies in green are still going to get smashed. Keep crying, punks. I love the taste of your tears. Well, they say, your Linehammer only works in highly contrived one-on-one situations. Real Warhammer battlefields involve multiple units, and as you walk forwards with your line, you're going to soon find that you're going to be charged by multiple enemy units in the face, and then you're going to be smashed to pieces, and we can all go back home and be family men and keep playing Warhammer like we've had the last 40 years. First of all, your example is wrong because you're assuming you've got 5 times as many points as I have. But secondly, yes, there are multiple units in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And you know what that means? Multiple lines! And so what's going to be happening to you very, very soon is these dogs, with their marching column 21-inch move, are going to very, very shortly put themselves in front of your units, and there's going to be nothing you can do. So, now your single unit in the centre is going to have to charge my line and get walloped in the face by about 100 attacks, or you're just going to have to sit there and get charged by me. So, punks, what's it gonna be? Aha, says the critic. Real Warhammer battlefields are full of terrain, and when we play Warhammer on real battlefields, your Linehammer's not going to work. Alright then, punks, let's load this battlefield up with terrain. Let's completely block my line. Okay, is that enough for you? Well, have you ever heard of the demonology spell Steed of Shadows? I'd like to introduce you to Miss Mirror, who's got it right here. Hi, punks! I just need to roll 5 on 2d6 to get this spell off, and because I'm so far away from the enemy wizard, they're only going to have one lousy fated dispel attempt, so they're not going to stop me. Here we go! Oh dear me! No stopping that. And now, commencing takeoff. Right, punks, now what are you going to do? Now you're going to be hit in the face by a zillion attacks and you're going to go home weeping to mother. Well, what do you want, you pathetic creature? I'm a busy man, you know. Well, Dr. Blaxill, I've come to tell you that I've got your Linehammer all worked out. It's got one fatal weakness.
Really? And what's that?
It's 'cause you haven't considered what would happen if I flank you.
Well, you expect me to give you a flank?
Well, you're going to have a flank somewhere, and I'm a chariot, and I'm going to find it, and you ain't got no combat reform no more for come to your rescue, so if I hit you in the flank, you're buggered.
Well, good luck with finding a flank, punk.
Right, now I'm going to go find that flank. What? There ain't no flank there, but if I go far enough, I'm surely going to find one. Bloody hell, it's a long line, this is. Come on! Come on, governor! Where's the flank? What?
Aha! A line that stretches from one end of the battlefield to the other. You didn't think of that, did you? No flanks for you to go in at all. My next example of Linehammer where you least expect it directly concerns an FAQ that's just been released from Warhammer the Old World, concerning overrun reforms. So the Knight unit here in blue is facing down that giant outside of his maximum charge distance. On the other side of this impassable terrain feature, these green and yellow knights have tried a risky charge against the Chaos Warriors. Unfortunately for the noble Bretonnians, this charge goes horribly wrong and they end up breaking from combat. They flee along the centre-to-centre line, which is represented here by this red laser, and sure enough, the knights are all cut down by the pursuing Chaos Warriors. Now, in previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy, these Chaos Warriors, as a quid pro quo for their pursuit move, would not have been allowed to reform. But in Warhammer the Old World, now because of this FAQ, they get to have their cake and eat it. I wonder what formation they'll reform into now for their next turn. And look what nonsense has now ensued. Some of these Chaos Warriors have the capacity to teleport like Superman 20 inches across the battlefield in a single overrun, by dint of being able to both pursue and reform at the same time. Now these poor knights are going to get hit by a runaway rampant express train of 20 attacks in the flank, so it's going to be goodbye them and goodbye prophetess. Note, terrain nerds, that I don't give a damn that part of my line is blocked by an impassable terrain feature, because there's easily enough room for my line to be able to wheel round and hit the outer extremity of that knight unit, who are then going to be obliged to close the door sideways to me. Better read the small print when you play me, punks, or otherwise you're going to be eviscerated. Here are some corn chosen, arranged in a conga line formation. This enables them to move at triple speed. What a useless formation, I hear you say. Why would I spend so many points on a premium combat unit to put it in a formation where it can't charge? The Bretonnians agree with you, and they're falling over with mirth behind. However, they might not be laughing soon. So the Bretonnians have closed forward on this stupid conga line. It can't even charge them. However, one of the knights in the blue unit has been reading the papers, and he's discovered something called the drilled rule. With the drilled rule, you may add up to 5 models from supporting ranks to the front rank before movement, and that includes charging. Uh-oh, says the sergeant of the Blue Knight unit. It could be one of those unexpected spawning lines that we've been vigorously denying exist. But don't worry, chaps, we've got it covered. Those stupid peasants there will absorb that line charge, and even if they give ground or fall back in good order, we'll smash it in the flank next turn. Nothing to worry about, chaps, just a bit of good old common sense will have this Linehammer nonsense all over by the Jubilee. Well, sure enough. The corn chosen do indeed reform into a line. But it's not quite the line that the Bretonnians expect.
Because of course, something else has happened here. If we merely check the flank, we see, oh no, disaster. Because it seems as though this new spawning line has opened up the men-at-arms to a flank charge, and suddenly the progressive fogies are going to get something rather unpleasant happening to them. And bingo! That's another reason why lines are so powerful, punks, because changing frontages allows you to manipulate where the majority of your models lie. And then we discover the ultimate irony. For all the boasting that Linehammer's easy to flank, in the Linehammer world, it's the line that flanks you. Ghost train's coming, kiddies! Listen to it scream!
Still listening, chaps? Good. Let's have a tutorial-style discussion about Linehammer to act as a little amendum to my humorous little video. Now, one of the things that people often say about Linehammer is, what Linehammer? It hasn't appeared in any of the games we've played, and on the online battle reports that are obviously made by, really good players, they don't use Linehammer, so therefore, it doesn't exist. Well, I think it would be very foolish to think that. So consider these 3 reasons as to why Linehammer does not appear in online battle reports very often. The first is that people who are making online content are making games to look nice to watch, and also nostalgic to watch. Now, lines look horrible. I think just about everyone agrees with that. They're also very unwieldy. They're very, very hard to do live, especially when you change your formation, which is very often one of the uses of Linehammer, as I explored in that video. Another reason is that people who are making battle reports to watch don't want to be dicks, and Linehammer does seem kind of inherently a dickish thing to do to your opponent. They're fighting like gentlemen, and most of the people who are watching the videos also think that Warhammer should be fought like gentlemen, and so that's the content that they're making. Also consider one other thing. Linehammer tactics aren't simple. They're actually very advanced and they're highly postmodern. Even players that I would rank as being very good might not fully have quite worked out Linehammer yet. And I'm not saying that that's because I'm necessarily light years ahead of them in every respect of the game. It's because I'm trying deliberately to break it, because I'm interested in finding where the flaws are. And not everyone thinks about Warhammer in that way, although I confess that I do, because I think that if you break something, it's better and easier to put it back together again in a way that means it doesn't break again. Now, another question that I think is very important to raise about Linehammer, which really I think sort of stemmed from a discussion I saw on the Square Based podcast, is a very simple one. Why is Linehammer bad? Now, I think for most players, the reason Linehammer is bad is a fairly instinctive one. It's just that it looks absurd. A huge line of troops on the tabletop looks absolutely nothing like any kind of Warhammer fantasy that we've seen before. So in that respect, I suppose, it's kind of inherently conservative. That we're used to Warhammer fantasy looking a certain way. We're used to it being a rank and flank game. Something that's not just fought on square bases, but also in square formations. And so when you see something that really doesn't look like Warhammer fantasy, like long lines, or huge numbers of skirmishers, with perhaps lizardmen and wood elves accepted, it doesn't really look like Warhammer fantasy anymore. And so there's an instinctive revulsion, I think, against Linehammer, which comes out of, as I say, a perhaps inherently kind of conservative conception of what Warhammer fantasy should look like, but a very powerful one. Also consider that that conception inherently chimes with the way in which Games Workshop have described the game so far. They've described it as rank and flank. They've talked about the importance of rank bonuses, that in a lot of the sort of instructional text you hear about Warhammer the Old World that you can read online, the importance of ranks is emphasized. The formations that are shown in their own kind of images or on their Warhammer TV battle reports show ranks. And so there is clearly the notion that this is meant to be a rank and flank game, not a game of lines. Because if it was going to be a game of lines, then one would think that that would be reflected somewhere in the general kind of discourse of the hobby that's centered around Games Workshop. And it really just isn't. Now, apart from that aesthetic quality of lines, there is also the absurd physics of it. Now, it seems easy enough to imagine why a model in a supporting rank in 8th edition could make a supporting attack, with one attack at any rate. That seems reasonable, and there are descriptions of how, a rider might be able to get a spear or a sword through the fighting rank, although his mount perhaps wouldn't have the discipline to be able to. When you're talking about models that are literally maybe on the other end of the table, swinging an axe and beheading an opponent that literally could be, perhaps in wargaming terms, maybe half a mile away from him, it just seems inherently absurd. Now, I have seen the defense in places that the line is meant to simulate what in previous editions was a so-called wrapping round formation. Now, I think they mean lapping round. Now, lapping round was a maneuver that you could perform from 3rd edition up to 6th edition. I believe it was removed in 7th edition, where if you won a combat but the enemy didn't break, you could take up to 2 models from each side of your rear rank and move it to the enemy's flanks to get more attacks. Now, the thing with that is that wasn't a kind of a simulation of something that happened. That was actually a tactic that you could employ, whether to lap round or not. It meant that you lost your rank bonus. It could sometimes put you in trouble if it meant that your lapped up sides could be charged by an enemy. It was a strategic play. It wasn't just a sort of a shorthand to imagining which models can swing. So there does seem like an inherently absurd physics with Linehammer that's much more disorientating from any other abstract conceptualization of who can hurt you that we've seen in a Warhammer gaming table before. And that's why my little example of where one attack is like telegraphed along a line and then kills someone so far away has some resonance, because that just seems inherently a very silly simulation of the physics of wargames. The other reason why I think Linehammer is bad from a kind of a gaming perspective, a purely gaming perspective, not an aesthetic perspective, is that, first of all, it's very slow and cumbersome. Now, if you spawn into lines at the very many opportunities that you get to reform in this game, which are literally as common as muck, because of the way combats are broken up with fallback in good orders and give grounds, and the fact that you get to reform at the end of your pursuit and you're overrun, there are loads of reforms that you can do. And so there are loads of occasions where you can go into lines, and this just kind of really slows the game down if you're continually reforming your formations. More seriously than this, it allows you to do all sorts of funky things that are unexpected. Now, because you can change the frontage of your unit so drastically, you can manipulate whether you get flank charges. You can manipulate, really where your unit is going to kind of hit in the next turn, especially if this happens in your enemy's turn. Free reforms and units spinning around into lines and opening up flanks in enemy turns is going to be something that's going to be very, very common in games of Warhammer the Old World. And those sort of situations, as I say, sometimes which occur even maybe when you've lost combat, where you're kind of, falling back in good order after you've kind of taken a bit of a kicking. Not only have you lost the combat, you've also not passed your modified leadership test, that you're actually then able to adopt a kind of a really sort of advantageous formation. And this just seems really rather silly in a kind of sort of game kind of situation. Now, another thing I think, and this is probably the main reason why I made the kind of original Linehammer skit, is because I think that the strength of Linehammer, contextual of course though it is, really exposes the really sad weakness of ranked up infantry. Now, of all of the separate troop types that I believe it's important to make relevant and powerful in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, the most important by far, more important than heroes, more important than monsters, more important than cavalry, is infantry. That most of the troop types in Warhammer Fantasy are infantry, melee infantry for the most part. And one of the things that 8th edition did, and I know I'm a bit of an 8th edition cheerleader here, was that it made infantry great. I won't even say great again, because I'm not sure how good infantry actually ever really were. You might have to go back even to 3rd ed for infantry to be quite good, because I think they really became actually quite weak from 4th ed onwards. But in 8th edition, infantry felt relevant, they felt powerful. Now, all of the advantages that infantry had, literally every single one of them, have been removed in Warhammer the Old World. They don't fight with supporting attacks, so there's, no point attack-wise having a second rank. There's no steadfast anymore, so there's no advantage to going deeper. There's no point trying to minimize your frontage because base to base doesn't exist. And, if all those disincentives at forming up in ranks weren't enough, you also have this Linehammer nonsense, which enables guys that are much further away than the second rank from the combat to swing and still be able to fight with their attacks. So, really, just the incentives to go in deep infantry formations, perhaps with the exception of many fringe cases. I know some people are talking about maybe certain combinations of Skaven being able to claim kind of more ranks, or, you having the warband special rule or something, that lines really just seem so much better than ranks in literally every context. And I cannot imagine any real scenario where anything other perhaps than a tar pit infantry formation will bother going in ranks. And I think that that's the really sad thing about the way in which the sort of relative power dynamics of troops have gone. The most important formation historically for Warhammer Fantasy and aesthetically is ranked up infantry. And that's the one that they managed to restore in 8th edition. And I think that they've made them pretty much worse than they've ever been before in Warhammer the Old World. And that's the real point of the Linehammer. It shows, really, I think, quite brutally the weakness of ranked up infantry. And that's just something I think is very sad. I really think that was a mistake fundamentally in their kind of game design. But I suppose more broadly with the Linehammer's bad point, I do agree that it is probably an inherently conservative position simply to dislike Linehammer. Now, I do think that probably people who are coming at Warhammer Fantasy from the outside, for example from Age of Sigmar, for example from historicals, and of course there are many historical battlefield scenarios where line formations did of course have, some strategic success in military history, probably don't mind what lines look like so much as people who are used to sort of ranked up kind of Warhammer Fantasy. But I do think that the common disdain for what lines look like, which unites both sides, those who agree with me and think Linehammer is a real problem, and those who don't think it's a problem, both of us think that lines don't look nice. Maybe there's some beauty in them that goes beyond the form of perversion, but I'm afraid I'm insufficiently postmodernist to see it. Now, the next point I think with it is, did Games Workshop intend this? Can we kind of psychoanalyze the creators of Warhammer the Old World and ask, did they mean single line formations where everyone could kind of attack to be as important in the game as I think they are? I don't think so, is the answer. As I say, completely out of step with all of their discourse and discussion about Warhammer Fantasy. There's no indication that, we're moving away from rank and flanks and more towards kind of longer lines. And I can't help thinking that when they playtested this game, they were probably just doing it with a sort of inherently kind of conservative way of thinking, which is to say that they were going in ranked up formations because that was what they were used to going in, that they had the movement trays that supported it. And they kind of assumed that other people were just going to do the same thing. And that was actually a very fair assumption, because I think that most people who are playing this game, especially in their first few games, are just going, on their normal movement trays and going in those ranked up formations because they think they look nice, and they just sort of assume that that's kind of how you play Warhammer. So I am not really convinced that this sort of hidden nonsense, as I am describing it, was something they intended. The other point would be, I don't really understand what they've gained by Linehammer. Now, superficially, when I saw them first say, the front rank can swing even if it's not in base to base, I assumed that what that meant was, they're trying to simplify it. They're trying to say, just the number of guys on the front can swing, that just maybe makes things kind of easier rather than determining base to base, which takes a little bit of, I suppose, nuance to kind of work out, who can swing and who can't. But of course, then they got rid of step up, which meant that you were already having to perform some sort of arithmetic to see who could swing. And actually, base to base does matter in certain situations, like hitting characters. And so, in a sense, they've still got base to base, and it still matters in many ways. And yet, they also got rid of it for determining the number of attacks. And I honestly can't see any benefit to putting in this rule
about allowing the full front rank even outside of base to base to swing. I just think it was put in there. It's almost a fairly innocuous just line of text in the rulebook, and I don't think they thought through the absolute consequences of it. I don't think they thought through the extremis of really long lines with planks of wood. That's the first thing. And I also don't think they thought through what could happen with units spawning into lines from rank and flank formations and then going into lines to kind of surprise their opponents. Now, inherently within what I'm saying, I suppose, is the tactical side. When I pushed my plank of wood forward across the battlefield, some of you might have thought that, well, Dr. Blaxill, you're saying there's no tactics in this game. You're saying there's no tactics to Linehammer. Absolutely not. There's a lot of tactics to Linehammer. It's jank heaven. For people who are gamists, and I include myself in that, it's fantastic. Consider that there are no combat reforms, for example, in Warhammer the Old World. Believe me, you could have an absolute Barney with combat reforms in 8th edition and 9th Age. All sorts of things were possible that would, probably appall a lot of gamers if they saw them, just because they just look so finicky and so gamey and so removed from a conception of what a heroic rank and flank Warhammer battlefield should look like. So there are all sorts of clever things you can do with lines. I'm not complaining about that. It's just what those things actually are appears to me to, or reminds me of the kind of highest level of sort of janky play that you could get from the 9th Age. Spawning into lines, artificially kind of manufacturing yourself flanks. This just seems to me to not really be what they were kind of trying to do here. If you were wanting to appeal to a kind of game that really appealed to a gamist, someone who just wanted to use the troops that he had to win and wasn't really interested even in, say, simulating in his mind a knight thundering across the battlefield with his lance, or your two burly units kind of clashing, in some forests and some rocks. For those people who, as I say, interested really in kind of Warhammer as, a game kind of numbers and a game of arcs of sight and positioning, the Linehammer rule is absolutely fine. It's a new kind of tactics, certainly, but it absolutely is tactical. I'm just not sure that that's the kind of tactics that are very accessible. I think that they're going to make a lot of players who are not, shall we say, in that kind of highest tier of gameyism, a little bit depressed, perhaps, when they see them occur on the table. And I think a lot of them haven't seen them occur on the table yet, and to be honest, I hope that they never do. I hope that Games Workshop change the rules or errata it, or the community comes to some kind of understanding. For example, to limit the number of the maximum width of lines, or what I would advocate would be bringing back base-to-base contact full stop and doing away with what I regard to be a really, really foolish mistake, which is allowing the front rank to swing even if they're not in base-to-base contact. Now, the other thing I guess might be, why am I complaining so much about Linehammer? Do I think it's the most single biggest problem with Warhammer the Old World? No, I don't. I think there are bigger problems with the game. Now, I don't mean to be overly negative when I say that. I'm focusing on some of the problems with the game because I find them inherently quite interesting. I find problems interesting to talk about, mainly because they can be fixed. And in any case, I can rave about how much I love Warhammer, and I do love Warhammer very much. I think Warhammer the Old World is a great game. At the moment, I don't think it is as good as any of the previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's a great game. But in terms of the things that I think are wrong with the game, or the sort of broken aspects of it, I don't think Linehammer is the worst. I think that Skirmish Hammer, which I haven't actually seen tested to destruction yet, would probably be even more disgusting to look at and even more abusable than Linehammer. We'll have to see how the meta develops, in the months and years to come to see whether I'm right on that. The elephant in the room, or should I say the lizard in the room, is obviously the dragon. Now, in a sense, that's an easier one because anybody, whether you are a novice gamer or a pro, you can tell the dragon is overpowered in Warhammer the Old World. It doesn't really take a crystal ball to work that out. Toughness 6, 10 wounds, 2 up armor, 5 up ward, 5 up regen, and an absolute boatload of really nasty attacks. Also the ability with all these reforms that he gets with give ground and fall back in good order to keep turning round and gangbanging whole armies to death. It's obvious, even from paper, that the dragon is OP. Put it on a few game battlefields and you'll find that it's absolutely ridiculous. As for Dragonhammer versus Linehammer, Well, I've already seen a video about that on 9-inch charge, but, I worked out how many halberd-armed Chaos Warriors it would take to bring down a dragon in a single round of combat. How long would your line of Chaos Warriors need to be? And I can tell you, you would need 5 battlefields all lined up, 360 of them. That's what you'd need to kill a dragon. So Linehammer ain't the worst problem. I think dragons are worse. So, it's not perhaps the worst problem, but I do think that it's more problematic than dragons and skirmishes in the following sense. Now, everyone understands that dragons should be really powerful and really kind of important. Even people who don't like Hero Hammer, I think have acknowledged that, powerful dragons, heroes on dragons, they're part of the Warhammer universe. We want them to be really strong. We want them to kind of feel heroic. And so having very powerful dragons at least doesn't feel wrong in that way. It perhaps doesn't make great games, but it doesn't feel wrong in terms of that fantasy fluff way. As far as skirmishes, for example, well, skirmishes, obviously, especially with lizardmen and especially with wood elves, are a part of the game. And I do think that having this 360-degree skirmish arc and this, loosey-goosey charges where everyone can kind of just run in on his own does simulate the kind of fluidity of what I imagine skirmishers in battle probably more accurately than the old 8th edition skirmish rules, where you were sort of like a kind of ranked up formation, but with just sort of additional kind of maneuverability. So even though I think that the dragon and the skirmishers are both overpowered, they are at least both simulating something I think is sensible, whereas the line doesn't simulate anything that is remotely sensible. It's a huge departure from what Warhammer has historically looked like. It's a huge departure from the sort of discourse of Warhammer where we emphasise ranks and flanks, and its physics are self-evidently stupid. It also presents all sorts of ridiculous opportunities for gamey gits like me to take massive advantage of the rules. So, thus endeth my dispatch. You may speculate, punks, whether I would use Linehammer if you played me, even if you were a total noob. Would I be a gentleman? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. Bye-bye.